Welcome back to the Government Report. The Trump administration has made surprising moves in the ongoing trade war with China. In a decision that caught many off guard, President Donald Trump's administration has implemented a series of sweeping tariffs, with key exemptions aimed at minimizing economic disruption. Notably, electronics like smartphones, laptops, and semiconductors have been spared from the highest tariffs to protect the tech sector. Pharmaceuticals, medical supplies, and informational materials, such as books and news publications, are also exempt to ensure public access and health stability. These targeted exemptions reflect a strategic attempt to balance trade pressure with economic and consumer stability. While tensions between the U.S. and China continue to rise, this particular exemption shows a more cautious and strategic approach. The Trump administration appears to be walking a tightrope, trying to protect American industries while also avoiding major disruptions to the economy. With inflation rising and consumer frustration mounting at home, this move may be aimed at easing public pressure and keeping the economy steady as the trade war unfolds. But this decision opens up new questions about what comes next in U.S.-China trade relations and how future exemptions might shape the global tech market. In this installment of the Government Report, we will look at this matter in detail and tell you how China responded against the Trump tariff. The response of the tech sector. The most direct and immediate beneficiaries of this policy shift are U.S.-based technology companies that import massive quantities of electronics from overseas, especially in China. Among the products removed from the latest round of tariffs are smartphones, laptops, computer accessories, semiconductor devices, and flat panel displays. These categories had been placed under stiff, reciprocal tariffs, some of which had surged to as high as 125% in recent months. Smartphones were the largest U.S. import from China in 2024, amounting to a staggering $41.7 billion. Laptops followed closely, with $33.1 billion worth imported during the same period. These figures are not just a reflection of American demand, but also highlight how deeply integrated China remains in the U.S. consumer electronics supply chain. For tech giants like Apple, the decision offers major financial and logistical relief. Apple had already begun shifting portions of its iPhone production to India in anticipation of the tariff hikes. The company even chartered cargo planes to ship over 600 tons, or roughly 1.5 million iPhones, to the U.S. from India to avoid what would have been devastating tariff-related price hikes. Analysts had predicted that the cost of a premium iPhone model could skyrocket to $2,300, compared to its current price of around $1,599, if the 125% tariff went into effect fully. Now, with this exemption, companies like Apple, Dell, Microsoft, and others can breathe easier, at least for the short term. The fear of massive consumer backlash, supply chain chaos, and a sharp downturn in electronics sales seems to have prompted this timely intervention. Tariff politics and consumer pressure. Although no official explanation was offered in the customs notice, political and economic realities offer strong clues about why the Trump administration chose to walk back these specific tariffs. Tariff policies have always been at the heart of Trump's vision of reshaping America's trade relationships. However, the costs of such policies are increasingly falling on U.S. consumers and businesses. Over the last year, U.S. inflation has remained stubbornly high, affecting everything from groceries to rent. Added import taxes on vital technology goods threaten to aggravate the situation. Smartphones, laptops, and other electronics are no longer luxury items. They are daily necessities for millions of Americans, including students, workers, and small businesses. Faced with rising frustration from consumers and backlash from some sectors of his party, Trump appeared to have made a tactical retreat. Analysts suggest that the administration recognized the political danger of allowing everyday tech products to become unaffordable. The midterm elections are on the horizon, and high consumer prices, particularly on popular items like iPhones and laptops, could prove costly for Trump and the Republican Party, if not addressed. The exemptions, therefore, serve as both an economic and political pressure release valve. They offer a degree of control over inflationary trends while allowing Trump to maintain a tough stance on trade in principle, even as he adjusts its implementation in practice. Beijing's response on tariff. The reaction from Beijing was relatively measured but clear. China's Ministry of Commerce labeled the move a small step in the right direction, but emphasized that the U.S. still needed to correct its broader wrongdoing in applying unilateral trade tariffs. Using a proverb, "The bell on a tiger's neck can only be untied by the person who tied it," Chinese officials stressed that only the U.S. could resolve the escalating trade conflict it started. Just days before Trump's exemptions, China had responded to the rising tariffs with its increase in import duties on American goods, raising them to a matching 125%. This tit-for-tat escalation has made global markets uneasy and has further complicated negotiations aimed at finding a long-term trade solution. Despite the ongoing tension, Trump has continued to assert that he maintains a positive relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping. He suggested that progress could still be made through negotiation, but remained firm in his belief that the current trade policies were essential to correcting years of unfair trade practices by China. The exemptions may have been necessary to cool domestic tensions, but they do not indicate a full reversal of Trump's trade philosophy.
I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to play hardball with China. I'm going to play hardball with you, President Xi. No. We're going to be very nice. They're going to be very nice.
Recently, U.S. President Donald Trump has hinted at cutting tariffs on Chinese goods, saying he plans to be very nice in trade talks and won't bring up the origins of COVID-19. This move seems aimed at calming markets and reducing tensions in the ongoing U.S.-China trade war. However, Chinese officials have responded coldly, calling Trump's statements a sign of backing down under pressure.
Saying they want to reach an agreement with China while continuing to apply maximum pressure is not the right way to deal with China, and it will not work.
They say the U.S. started the tariff hikes and should now remove all tariffs if it truly wants peace in trade. China also denied that any real talks are happening between the two nations, despite Trump claiming there are daily discussions. Chinese government advisors view Trump's softer tone as a strategy to deal with U.S. inflation and market worries. They say Beijing doesn't trust Trump due to his changing messages and is in no hurry to make a deal. While smartphones and laptops have been exempted for now, the future remains uncertain for semiconductors and related technologies. These components are the backbone of nearly all modern devices, from phones and computers to cars and industrial machinery. Recognizing their critical importance, Trump has repeatedly stated that the United States must not rely on foreign nations, especially China, for semiconductor production. Although some semiconductor equipment and memory chips were included in the recent list of tariff exclusions, the White House has confirmed that a new national security investigation into semiconductor imports is imminent. The findings of this investigation could lay the groundwork for fresh tariffs or other trade restrictions, possibly affecting both China and other countries involved in chip manufacturing. The Biden administration had previously invested billions into domestic semiconductor production through legislation, and now Trump appears to be taking a different route by using trade measures to push companies toward onshoring. This approach is already yielding results. Firms like NVIDIA and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, have announced or accelerated plans to build facilities within the U.S., responding both to market demand and political incentives. However, the complexity of global chip manufacturing means that any disruption in trade could have wide-reaching effects. New tariffs could strain global supply chains and cause price increases across a range of industries far beyond electronics. Tech industry reactions. For now, the U.S. tech industry is relieved. After months of uncertainty, many companies received the news with open arms. Analysts like Dan Ives from Wedbush Securities described the move as the most bullish news we could have heard this weekend, reflecting the industry's need for stability in trade policy. Stock markets responded positively, with tech-heavy indices making gains. Companies like Apple, Microsoft, and NVIDIA saw upticks in share prices, driven by investor optimism that the exemptions would help sustain sales and keep production lines moving. Beyond financial markets, there was also a sense of emotional relief. Many executives had been privately lobbying for these changes for months, warning that continued tariffs could lead to job cuts, decreased investment, and reduced competitiveness. Trump's close ties to several key tech leaders have also likely played a role. CEOs such as Apple's Tim Cook have maintained a working relationship with the administration. Cook even hosted a pre-inaugural ball in honor of Trump's second term and visited the president at his Florida home. Such connections have helped keep communication lines open between government and industry during a particularly volatile period. One of the most challenging aspects of Trump's trade strategy is managing the conflict between national security objectives and economic well-being. On one hand, the administration wants to ensure that the U.S. is not overly dependent on foreign nations, especially geopolitical rivals like China, for essential technologies. On the other hand, sudden tariff hikes on widely used goods can cause real economic pain at home. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt highlighted this dilemma in a recent statement, saying that while the U.S. must reduce reliance on China, it also must take care not to harm its consumers and industries in the process. This latest exemption is an example of that balancing act in motion. The administration is likely to continue applying pressure on industries to move manufacturing back to American soil, but in a way that doesn't drive up costs for consumers too quickly. Already, major firms are responding by exploring new domestic production sites, training American workers, and reconfiguring their supply chains. But these efforts will take years to fully realize, meaning that some level of foreign reliance will remain in the short term. Effect on global markets. Even with the exemptions in place, global markets remain jittery. The week ended on a volatile note. While U.S. stock markets managed to close higher, gold surged to a new record high, a clear sign that investors are seeking safer assets amid uncertainty. Meanwhile, the yield on 10-year U.S. government bonds jumped, posting its largest weekly gain since 2001. The U.S. dollar, on the other hand, dropped sharply, signaling concerns about the long-term direction of the American economy. These mixed signals reflect how complicated the current economic environment has become. While the exemptions may offer temporary relief, they do not address the deeper structural issues driving trade tensions and market instability. Investors are watching closely to see whether Trump follows up this exemption with further tariff relief, or if he returns to a more aggressive posture in the coming weeks. Within Trump's own Republican Party, reactions to the tariff exemptions are divided. While some lawmakers praise the move as a smart adjustment to a tough policy, others worry that the flip-flopping could confuse voters and weaken the party's messaging ahead of key elections. Several Republican strategists fear that prolonged trade tensions and rising consumer prices could hurt the party's chances in the 2026 midterms. Despite the dissent, Trump has remained steadfast. He insists that his reciprocal tariff policy is working, arguing that temporary discomfort is necessary to achieve long-term economic sovereignty. In his view, any turbulence in financial markets or industry reactions is a price worth paying for a fairer trade relationship with China. However, Trump also seems aware of the risks. By choosing to exempt key consumer products, he is hedging his bets, preserving his tough-on-China image while avoiding a backlash at the checkout counter. Whether this delicate balance can be maintained remains to be seen, especially if new tariffs on semiconductors or other sectors reignite tensions. The future. All eyes are now on the semiconductor industry, which is expected to become the next key battleground in the ongoing and increasingly complex trade conflict between the United States and China. With both nations locked in a fierce rivalry over technological dominance, the White House has confirmed that it is preparing to launch a new national security investigation specifically targeting the semiconductor sector. The investigation's findings will be crucial in determining whether the U.S. will impose additional tariffs or restrictions, all in the name of securing America's technological future and maintaining its leadership in innovation. Semiconductors, often referred to as chips, are the backbone of the modern economy, powering everything from smartphones and computers to advanced military systems and electric vehicles. Almost every major industry, including automotive, healthcare, telecommunications, and defense, relies on semiconductors to function. Given their central role in global supply chains, any disruption in the supply or pricing of semiconductors could have a profound and far-reaching impact. If President Donald Trump proceeds with introducing new tariffs on semiconductor products, the consequences will stretch far beyond the United States and China. Countries around the world will feel the ripple effects. Manufacturers in Europe, Asia, and other parts of the world rely heavily on semiconductor imports from China, Taiwan, and South Korea, meaning that tariffs could lead to higher costs, delays in production, and a slowdown in the rollout of new technologies. Even industries not directly involved in semiconductor production could be affected, as the cost of goods and services could rise as a result of increased production costs in other sectors. Additionally, national defense could also be jeopardized, as chips play an essential role in military technology, communication systems, and surveillance. Industry leaders are already preparing for the worst. Companies that rely heavily on semiconductor imports are lobbying intensely to influence the investigation's outcome, warning the government that poorly timed or overly restrictive measures could backfire. They argue that excessive tariffs could stifle innovation and make it harder for American businesses to remain competitive in the global market. If new restrictions are implemented, companies could face significant challenges in sourcing the chips they need for production, which could delay product launches and increase costs for consumers. While the current exemptions on electronics have temporarily eased tensions, experts warn that this could be a temporary calm before the next storm. The ongoing investigation and the potential for new tariffs on semiconductors suggest that the trade conflict is far from over, and the stakes are higher than ever. Industry experts, policymakers, and consumers alike are closely watching the developments, knowing that whatever decisions are made could reshape the global technology landscape for years to come. The Trump administration's decision to exempt smartphones, laptops, and other electronics from high import tariffs marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing US-China trade war. While the move offers immediate relief to businesses and consumers, it also reveals the limits of hardline trade policies when confronted with domestic economic realities. Whether this shift represents a lasting change or just a temporary recalibration remains to be seen. What is certain is that the global trade landscape is evolving rapidly, and the consequences of each new policy move will be felt far beyond the walls of the White House. For now, consumers can enjoy some respite from rising prices, but with tensions still high and new investigations looming, the next chapter in this trade saga is just beginning. So, with all this shifting around in trade policies, what do you think the future holds for the US-China relationship? Will the exemptions hold, or will we see more changes soon? Let Alex know what you think. Back to you, Alex.
That's it for this installment of the Government Report. If you made it this far, congratulations. You now know things you probably weren't supposed to. I'm Alex Carter, and I'll see you in the new installment of the Government Report.